I want you to try something right now. Just for a moment, stop whatever else is happening in your head and pay attention to what your mind is doing. Is it quiet? Or is it already running? Is it replaying something that happened yesterday, worrying about something that might happen tomorrow, judging something about right now? Is there a background hum of anxiety that you've gotten so used to that you barely notice it anymore? If your mind is anything like most people's, it is rarely, if ever, still. It moves from thought to thought, from worry to memory to comparison to fear, in a cycle that never truly stops. And here's the part that most people never pause to question: we accept this as normal. We assume that a restless, anxious, noise-filled mind is simply the price of being alive in a complicated world. But what if it isn't? What if the mental noise you've normalized is not just an inconvenience, but the single biggest thing standing between you and the life you actually want? This audiobook is about exactly that. It's about what happens when the mind becomes cluttered with years of accumulated stress, unexamined fears, negative patterns, and emotional residue, and more importantly, it's about what becomes possible when you begin the process of clearing that clutter out. Let's call it what it is: a mental detox. Not a trendy concept. Not a quick fix. A real, honest, gradual process of cleaning out what no longer serves you so that what actually matters can finally breathe. I want to begin by asking you a question that might feel uncomfortable. And that's intentional, because the truth is that genuine change almost always starts with a moment of discomfort. Here it is: when was the last time your mind felt genuinely light? When was the last time you woke up without a weight already sitting on your chest? When was the last time you went through an entire day without a low-grade undercurrent of anxiety, irritability, or a vague sense that something isn't quite right? If that question is hard to answer, if it's been so long that you struggle to remember, then this conversation is for you. Let's start at the beginning. With the question of how minds become cluttered in the first place. The mental noise most of us carry didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated slowly, the way dust settles on a surface you don't notice until one day you look and realize you can't see clearly anymore. It came from the critical voice of a parent or teacher that replayed so many times it became your own inner critic. It came from failures you experienced and then kept relitigating in your mind, as if going over them again and again would somehow change the outcome. It came from comparisons, to siblings, to classmates, to the curated highlight reels of strangers on social media. It came from hurt that was never fully processed, from disappointments that were tucked away rather than worked through, from 1,000 small moments of feeling not enough, not ready, not quite right. None of this was a dramatic event. It was slow. Quiet. And precisely because it was gradual, it never felt like the crisis it actually was. Think about the way water erodes rock. Any individual drop of water landing on stone does essentially nothing. But when drops fall in the same place, again and again, over months and years, they carve canyons. That's what happens inside a mind that absorbs stress, fear, resentment, and negativity without any regular process of release or renewal. The erosion is invisible. The damage is real. And here's the part that matters: a cluttered mind doesn't just feel bad. It performs badly. When your mental bandwidth is consumed by chronic worry and recycled anxiety, there's simply less of it available for clear thinking, for creativity, for genuine connection, for the kind of focused, intentional action that actually changes your life. You can be extraordinarily talented and still operate far below your potential simply because of the noise. So let's talk about what that noise actually sounds like. For many people, the most pervasive form of mental clutter is negative self-talk, the ongoing, often barely conscious narration that frames experiences through a lens of inadequacy or threat. When an opportunity appears, the voice says you're not ready. When you make a mistake, it says you always do this. When you try something new, it says everyone is watching and judging. This voice is so constant, so embedded in the texture of daily thinking, that most people don't even recognize it as a voice. They experience it as reality. But here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The stories your mind tells about you and about the world are not facts. They are interpretations. They are patterns. And patterns, unlike facts, can be changed. the negative narrative most of us carry wasn't chosen. It was absorbed. From the environment we grew up in, from the experiences that shaped us, from the culture that surrounded us. We didn't decide to believe that we were not enough, or that the world was fundamentally unsafe, or that other people's judgments defined our worth. We absorbed those beliefs the way a child absorbs a language, without conscious choice, simply by being immersed in them long enough. And just as a language that was absorbed can be examined, questioned, and ultimately expanded or replaced, so can the internal narratives that are limiting you. But before you can change them, you have to notice them. You have to catch the voice in the act. When a negative thought arises, and they will, they always do, the first and most important move is not to fight it, not to suppress it, not to argue with it, but simply to observe it. To step back just far enough to ask, is this a fact or an interpretation? Is this a description of what's real, or a description of what I fear? Is this something I know, or something the anxious part of my mind is predicting? Most of the time, if you ask those questions honestly, you'll find that the most discouraging, limiting thoughts are not based on solid evidence. They're projections. They're echoes of old pain. They're the mind trying to protect you from a danger that isn't actually there. And once you see that, once you recognize the thought as a thought rather than experiencing it as truth, something interesting happens. It begins to lose its grip. Now I want to address the most exhausting form of mental clutter, the one that drains enormous energy while producing almost nothing. Overthinking. Ask yourself this. How many times have you spent an hour, or a day, or a week, mentally rehearsing a conversation that hadn't happened yet? How many times have you analyzed a past decision from every possible angle, long after changing it was an option? How many times have you generated 5 different worst-case scenarios for a situation that, statistically, was far more likely to resolve itself without catastrophe? Overthinking is seductive because it disguises itself as productivity. It feels like you're doing something. It feels like careful analysis. But there is a crucial difference between genuine reflection, which is purposeful, time-limited, and leads to a decision or understanding, and overthinking, which is circular, compulsive, and leads mostly to more anxiety. Here's the thing about overthinking that very few people recognize. Your mind is not actually trying to solve the problem. It's trying to eliminate uncertainty. And here's the uncomfortable truth: uncertainty cannot be eliminated by thinking about it. Uncertainty is only resolved by action, by time, or by the acceptance that some things are simply not yours to control. When you realize this, when you genuinely internalize that more thinking is not the path to more certainty, the stranglehold of overthinking begins to loosen. The goal is not to think perfectly. The goal is to think enough to take the next step, and then take it. One practice that helps enormously is learning to ask a different question when you notice your mind spiraling. Instead of "what if this goes wrong" or "why did I do that?" train yourself to ask "what can I actually do right now?" That single shift, from the passive anxiety of hypothetical futures and unchangeable pasts, to the active agency of present possibility, is one of the most powerful redirections available to a struggling mind. This brings me to something that sits underneath both negative thinking and overthinking, quietly powering both of them. Fear. Not always obvious, dramatic, adrenaline-producing fear. More often, it's a quieter version. The fear of being judged. The fear of not being enough. The fear of trying and failing, or worse, of trying and succeeding only to have the success taken away. The fear that if you allow yourself to hope for something, the disappointment will be unbearable. Fear, in its most insidious form, presents itself as wisdom. It says, be realistic, protect yourself, don't take unnecessary risks. And because these sound like sensible instructions, we follow them without examining whether they're actually serving us or simply keeping us stuck. Here's what fear almost never tells you: that the thing you're protecting yourself from may never actually happen. That the version of failure your mind is generating is almost certainly much worse than the reality would be. That the discomfort of trying and not succeeding is survivable, and almost always educational. And that the cost of never trying, the slow erosion of possibility, the quiet accumulation of what if, is often far more painful than any concrete setback. The relationship between fear and self-doubt is worth examining closely. Because while fear tends to be about external threats, self-doubt is about something more interior and more fundamental. It's the quiet, persistent sense that you are not the kind of person who gets to have the things you want. That your goals belong to other people, smarter people, luckier people, people who somehow deserve them in a way you don't. Where does this come from? Usually from somewhere specific. A moment when someone whose opinion mattered told you that you weren't capable. A time when you tried hard and didn't succeed, and interpreted the failure as evidence about your identity rather than information about the attempt. A long-running comparison between your internal reality, your doubts, your fears, your mistakes, and the polished external presentation of people around you. Self-doubt is not a verdict. It's a pattern. And patterns can be interrupted. Now let's talk about time, specifically about the enormous mental energy most of us spend in temporal locations other than the present. The past has a powerful pull on the mind. Not the pleasant parts of the past, generally. Those tend to be relatively easy to leave in place. It's the painful parts, the mistakes, the regrets, the roads not taken, the things done or left undone, that the mind returns to compulsively. As if by revisiting them enough times, something could be changed. As if the right amount of rumination would somehow make it right. But of course, it won't. What happened happened. And no amount of mental time travel back to the moment of decision, to the conversation you wish you'd handled differently, to the opportunity you didn't take, will alter a single thing that is already true. What's worth understanding here is that the past is not actually the problem. Your relationship to the past is the problem. The same events can be held as wounds that define you or as lessons that informed you, in which frame you choose matters enormously. One keeps you stuck. One sets you free. Both are looking at the same facts. The future presents a mirror image challenge. Where the past anchors us in regret, the future often drowns us in anticipatory anxiety. We spend enormous mental energy worrying about outcomes that may never materialize, preparing for catastrophes that statistically won't happen, bracing for pain that may never arrive. And in doing so, we rob the present moment of the attention and energy it needs to actually create a better future. Here is a reframe worth trying on. Your past is a source of wisdom, not a definition of who you are. Your future is a space of possibility, not a threat to be defended against. In the present, this moment, right now, is the only place where anything can actually be done about either of them. This might sound simple. But truly integrating it, letting it change how your mind actually functions day to day, is the work of a lifetime. And it starts with a practice that is easier to describe than to maintain, repeatedly, patiently, gently returning your attention to now. Not to the story you're telling about now. Not to your evaluation of now compared to then or later. Just now. So how do you actually begin the process of clearing all of this out? How do you move from understanding that your mind is cluttered to genuinely cleaning it? The first thing to recognize is that this is not primarily a thinking problem. You cannot think your way out of an overly full mind. The solution isn't to be smarter about your anxiety, or more analytical about your fear. The solution is to change what you're feeding your mind on a daily basis. Because your mind, like everything else, is shaped by inputs. What you consistently expose yourself to, the content you consume, the conversations you have, the relationships you maintain, the environment you inhabit, all of this is constantly shaping your neural patterns, your default interpretations, your emotional baseline. You cannot pour clean water into a glass that is already full. You have to empty first. This means making intentional choices about what gets your attention. It means recognizing that not every notification deserves a response, not every opinion deserves incorporation, not every piece of news you could consume is worth the space it will occupy in your mind. Attention is finite. It is your most valuable resource. And like any resource, the returns depend entirely on where you invest it. The second element of mental clearing is silence. And this one tends to be deeply uncomfortable for people who have never really practiced it, because silence, genuine quiet without a screen, without music, without something to occupy the mind, is where all the things you've been avoiding tend to surface. But that discomfort is not a warning sign. It's a symptom of the very thing that needs to be addressed. When we fill every quiet moment with noise and distraction, we never give ourselves the chance to process what's accumulated. We just keep adding more on top of the unprocessed pile. And over time, that pile gets heavier, even if we can't see it directly. Starting with even 5 or 10 minutes of intentional quiet each day, sitting with your own thoughts, your own breath, your own company, begins to create the space where processing can happen. Where old patterns can be recognized for what they are. Where the persistent noise begins, slowly, to settle. A third practice involves what you might call an honest inventory of your thoughts. Not analyzing them, not judging them, just noticing them. When you start paying attention, really paying attention, to the quality of your own inner narration, you often discover patterns that have been running on autopilot for years. Default interpretations. Habitual worries. Knee-jerk reactions that have nothing to do with the actual present moment and everything to do with old experiences your mind is still replaying. Noticing these patterns is the beginning of choice. Because you cannot choose something different from a pattern you don't even know you're running. As this clearing process continues, and it is a process, not an event, something begins to shift. The mind becomes quieter. Not because life becomes easier, but because the relationship to difficulty changes. Problems that would once have sent your nervous system into overdrive become things you can sit with, examine, and address without being overwhelmed by them. The space between an event and your response to it widens. And in that wider space, you find something that was not available before: choice. A calmer mind doesn't mean an emotionally flattened mind, or one that is somehow detached from life. It means a mind that can feel things fully without being destroyed by them. It means being moved without being swept away. It means being able to encounter uncertainty without spiraling, to experience disappointment without collapsing, to face criticism without losing the thread of who you are. This is what it means to be genuinely mentally strong. Not the performance of strength. Not the suppression of difficulty. The actual capacity to meet what comes and remain, at some essential level, yourself. There's another dimension of this that I want to spend a moment on, because it's one that often gets overlooked in conversations about mental well-being. It's the quality of your relationship with yourself. Most of us live in a state of low-grade internal conflict. We judge ourselves harshly for our mistakes. We hold ourselves to standards we would never apply to someone we love. We speak to ourselves with a bluntness and cruelty that would be immediately recognizable as damaging if directed at anyone else. And then we wonder why we feel exhausted, why our confidence is fragile, why a single piece of criticism can unravel an entire day. The most fundamental form of mental decluttering might be this: learning to treat yourself with the same basic decency you would extend to another person who is struggling. Not toxic positivity, not pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. Just honest, compassionate acknowledgement that being human is difficult, that you are doing your best with what you have, and that your mistakes are information rather than evidence of your fundamental unworthiness. When you begin to genuinely befriend yourself, to stop treating your inner life as a problem to be fixed and start treating it as a reality to be inhabited with curiosity and care, something profound shifts. The constant effort of managing, judging, and suppressing your own inner experience begins to ease. And in that ease, resources are freed up. Energy that was going towards self-opposition becomes available for the things that actually matter. Think about what it would feel like to stop fighting yourself. To stop the internal trial in which you are simultaneously the accused, the prosecutor, and the judge. To simply be where you are, as you are, with the understanding that where you are is always the starting point and never the final verdict. Here is something I want you to genuinely consider, not as an abstract idea but as something personally relevant to you right now. What would be different in your life if your mind were an ally rather than an adversary? If the voice in your head supported you rather than undermined you, oriented you toward possibility rather than threat, helped you learn from difficulty rather than drowning in it? That version of your inner experience is not fantasy. It is what becomes possible when the mental clutter is cleared, when the default patterns are examined and consciously redirected, when the relationship with your own mind becomes one of care and partnership rather than conflict and control. And here's what I want you to understand about the path there: it is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain effortlessly. A clear mind requires ongoing attention, the same way a healthy body requires ongoing care. There is no point at which you are done. There are only days when you are more or less conscious of what you're putting in, what you're carrying unnecessarily, and what you need to release. The daily practice of mental clarity is simple in principle, even when it's difficult in execution. It means beginning each day with some intentional orientation, not just being carried from sleep into the rushing current of demands and notifications, but choosing, before the noise begins, how you want to show up. It means monitoring the quality of what you're feeding your mind throughout the day, and making adjustments when you notice the input deteriorating. It means ending each day with some form of reflection, not self-judgment, but honest acknowledgement of what the day brought, what you learned, and what can be set down rather than carried into tomorrow. Over time, this kind of consistent attention creates something that no single dramatic effort ever could. It creates a new normal. A baseline of mental clarity and emotional resilience that slowly, quietly becomes your default rather than your aspiration. And this, I believe, is where the real power lives. Not in the dramatic moments of insight or the extraordinary days when everything flows, but in the ordinary, repeated, unremarkable practice of choosing, each day, to tend to your inner life with the same basic seriousness you give to everything else. Let me leave you with this. Every one of us carries wounds. Every one of us has been shaped by experiences we would not have chosen. Every one of us has developed patterns of thinking and responding that made sense in some context and now, perhaps, no longer serve us. This is not a character flaw. It is the human condition. It is what happens when feeling creatures move through a complicated world. But the fact that these patterns were shaped by the past does not mean they are fixed. The mind is not a monument. It is a living system, capable of learning, adapting, and changing in ways that science continues to find more remarkable with every passing decade. You are not locked into the story your mind has been telling. You are not the sum of your worst thoughts about yourself. You are not the anxiety that wakes you at 3 a.m, or the fear that holds you back, or the voice that says you're not enough. Those are patterns. And patterns, with awareness and practice and patience, can be changed. The work is not easy. But it is perhaps the most worthwhile work there is. Because when your mind becomes clearer, every other part of your life benefits. Your relationships deepen. Your decisions improve. Your capacity for joy expands. Your resilience strengthens. The life you've been reaching for from a place of noise and fear becomes accessible from a place of clarity and groundedness. That life is not somewhere else. It is not waiting for circumstances to align or for some future version of you who has figured everything out. It is available now, in the choices you make today about what you put into your mind and what you allow yourself to let go. The question is simply this: are you ready to begin? And if you've stayed with this conversation all the way to this moment, I think you already know the answer.